Dwight Shawk from Hord Family Farms. Dwight graduated from Kansas State with his master's degree in 2018. Dwight then joined Hord Family Farms as research coordinator in 2018. And now he has transitioned to his current role as nutritionist. So thank you, Dwight.
No, thank you for that introduction. Say a lot of things I'm going to mirror and echoes Dr. Tokash's, so might just go in a little bit more detail of what he said. So I think Pat did a really good job this morning just giving you an overview of Hords and our company, but if you missed that talk, I'll just give a brief overview. We're a fifth generation family business. We have three major areas of egg focus. We have hog production in Ohio and also in Minnesota. And then we also do some grain farming and have a cattle feedlot operation. So one of the topics I was asked was, why do we conduct research? Well, if you're a system that doesn't have their own research capabilities, then I would imagine that you're relying on publications and from universities or from other feed ingredient companies, and you're either waiting for that next publication to come out or you're having to purchase it. However, you got to realize, as we discussed in other sessions today, that you're not always going to repeat that response. So when I was sitting through Maddie's presentation earlier and she was showing her data set, I was asking these questions. With her pigs, was there a difference in health status? I mean, in that study, were they PERS positive, where my pigs would be PERS negative? Growth rate and feed conversion, that's really important when you're looking at dietary requirements, such as a lysine requirement. Management style, that's also key. If you're in a nursery that's very well run, they're doing gruel, mat feeding versus a system that it's not executing that, you can pick up some differences. Dietary formulation, that can be as simple as a crumble versus a pellet diet, complex versus a simple nursery program. And then finally, genetics. If you're talking into an E. coli response and they use Durox and you have a 337, your response might be a little bit different. So for me, it's always important that we're taking these ideas and vetting them with our own pigs. So to get a little bit more into the why, Pat hit on this morning about our company tree. Prior to having any research capabilities, the system was just doing a barn versus barn comparison like many systems were doing. That's great, but you also get a lot of noise just if you have different management styles in one barn versus the other, and it's hard to pick up a response. So with us, when continuing on with the innovation side, we decided to start doing some side-by-side studies. Also, keep in mind, we started in Ohio with research, and there we've always been challenged with the higher ingredients. So when I first joined the company, and I started when I was actually in grad school in K-State, the department was very young. We was only like 2-3 years into it, so over the past 7 years, I've got to see it grow. And initially, we were just looking at finding ways to lower feed costs, but we wanted to maintain or improve performance. That was our main driving factor. As we matured as a department, we decided that we need to start to move on beyond that. And we wanted to be the department that is providing the data sets that's going to answer the questions for our management teams, nutritionists, and veterinarians we work with, and also our ingredient procurement team. So what value does research provide? Well, we're trying to find solutions to problems that are unique to the Hord system. So a great example would be Dawn out in Ohio. That's probably not something you guys experience out here in the West. When I looked at some DDG samples from out here, I kind of fell over because they were below 2 parts per million. Last 2-3 years in Ohio, I've dealt with DDGs with 15 parts per million. So we've done a lot of work in that area as far as just using sodium metabisulfite to solve that problem and evaluate strategies. As I mentioned before, we're also trying to answer the questions of our management teams and our veterinarians and ingredient procurement teams. Their questions I typically encounter is one, from our management teams would be evaluate current or new management practices. So the nursery team might come to me and say, what is the best way to gruel feed pigs? If we come from our veterinarians, they're going to be asking about what's the impact of vaccines and medications on mortality and performance. Our ingredient procurement teams, they're going to be asking what is the best way to utilize feed ingredients that are unique to the Hords. such as DDGs, bakery, extruded soybean meal. How do we assign a value? Or they might come to me and ask, what's the better buy, copper sulfate or tri-basic? And then finally, as the nutritionist, I'm constantly asking the question, am I feeding the pigs correctly? Are my nutrient requirements right as far as lysine use? And also in the nursery, I'm always asking the question, do we need complex, simple programs, etc. And finally, something we haven't done a lot is genetic studies as far as just sire lines. So pretty much at the end of the day, we're trying to find a difference in average daily gain, feed efficiency, and or mortality rate. And if we have these three factors, we can assign a value to that idea and see what is worth to the system. So kind of continue on to this. We're also using our research sites to screen new technology and products that vendors are bringing forth to us. We have an open door policy, but we feel that we really need to test these products before we implement them. Yes, a product could be 10 cents and it could have a decent data set, but if you get 4 or 5 of those products into your diets, you could rack up 50 cents a pig pretty quickly. And you also don't know of how well those products work with each other. So our main goal is make sure the response is repeatable, and that we're providing, using technologies to provide a consistent ROI. Also, to show you why we're also skeptical and we like to do the research on them, is my current success rate has been 6% over the past 7 years. And that probably also goes with the talk this morning as far as differences in pigs. So as Dr. Tokash, we can all mention, we do use our research facilities as an income stream when we're leasing them out to ingredient companies and also universities. The greatest pro on this is the revenues help support the staff and the facilities. Also, by working with the companies and universities, we're getting new ideas coming in the door and fresh perspectives. First new look at a new product, or if the university, they have a great idea. And also, as a past graduate student, it provides a great learning opportunity for the students. Without the work that I did in my grad school days, working with Hords and New Horizon at the time, I wouldn't have been very prepared to take the role I did with Hords when I first started. Greatest con, as Dr. Tokash talked, our company priorities are not always at the top of the list. We have to work them into the scheduling, but eventually we do get the answers. So the research capabilities. We first started with a commercial nursery that was retrofitted. Phil often tells me about the days where he had to carry feed and weigh pigs, similar to a grad student scenario. Over time, as we've grown as a company and we expanded, we've gone down to 5 research sites and have 19,000 pigs plus on studies. Our primary focus is nursery and finishing, and also wean to finish, but we do have some limited capabilities of sow research. Just for time's sakes, I'll be focusing on the nursery and finishing side. And pretty much the goal for each of our sites, we want to try to get a large replication in the commercial environment, and we're trying to get our staff to really work on mirroring the management styles of the field so that we have results that we feel that can be implemented tomorrow and repeatable. So the next couple slides, we'll just do a brief tour of our sites. This is our Ohio nursery that was retrofitted. It's a 5,200 head site. We use the Big Dutchman feed system. And we're also doing 80 test pens at this facility. In Ohio, we also have another finisher, kind of similar scenario where it was retrofitted for research capabilities, added in the Big Dutchman's feed system. Got 72 test pens. One thing I've learned at these sites, if you limit the number of feed bins you have, it's going to limit the number of treatments you can do, and that forces you to have high replications and great research. This is our new facility that was just finished up this summer. It's a wean to finish site. We got 2,400 head, 80 plus test pens. We also went with the Big Dutchman feed system. Greatest pros on that feed system, when it works, it's great. When it doesn't work, it's pretty much like a month-long struggle. The other issue, if you really want to get technical, you can have contamination issues because everything is going through the same pipe. In Minnesota, we also have a older facility. It's a research nursery. It's a 7,000 head site. 160 plus test pens. Also have the feed logic system there. I'm not as well as versed in the feed logic as I am the Big Dutchman, to be honest, but as far as I'm concerned, it's great, but it is hard sometimes to find parts for it. We also have finisher barns in Minnesota as well, 2 sites, 1,200 plus heads, and 48 pens with 25 pigs per pen. One thing that some people don't think about when they think about research facilities, they just focus in just on the research sites. But there's a lot of behind the scenes that we have to deal with and work with. First and foremost is the feed mill. It's easier said than done sometimes, but they need to manufacture the diet to the right specifications and then get it into the right feed bin. Our staff spends a lot of time just trying to make sure that is happening. We use microgrits just to make sure the color is correct. And we also check the feed amount that is delivered to make sure it matches up with the order as far as just using bin sentry. Pig movement, probably one of the hardest jobs in the company. We have to work with them to make sure we can get pigs moved out of the sites when needed, and they're flexible with our schedule, but we also be flexible with ours. Sow farms, always hate to ask for them to do something else to the day because they have a busy schedule, but for our nursery and wean to finish sites, we ask them to sort the pigs by gender and making sure they're sending pigs to the site that would be representation of what they're sending to the other sites. Research team, Dr. Tokesh did a great thing, so I might be echoing a little bit here, but pretty much as he says, we can create the perfect research design and protocol. But if our team in the barn is not engaged, not willing to do things right, the data is worthless. So I probably spend most of my time just working with our team. And kind of my goals for the team is one, first and foremost, is honesty. I don't want them to be afraid if something goes wrong. I want them to be willing to come to me, tell me what happened, and then we can try to find the solution. Second is they need to go to the extra mile. As far as finding errors, what went wrong, and reporting back to them. Just not accept the fact that they have a missing pig, who cares? Second thing is animal husbandry, something that doesn't get brought up a lot of times, but we spend a lot of time with our staff as far as just treating pigs and more importantly, trying to identify diseases in the barn. Nothing's gonna wreck a trial quicker than an E. coli or an ileitis outbreak. And finally, as we all say, we're trying to keep these people engaged. Weighing counting pigs might seem like an easy job, but the fatigue is what kills you the most. And it pretty much leads to our number one cause of them leaving the job is just burnout. So we try to recognize and appreciate them. And without our team here, I wouldn't be able to come here today for this presentation. So just to give you a brief idea of how we're generating our ideas at the Hords. We have our internal sources, so I'm in meetings, barn visits with our management teams and our ingredient procurement teams, seeing what their questions are, what their concerns, and then pretty much having them come to me with their questions. We'll do a quick review, see what's been published, see if there's adequate data out there, and it also gives us ideas how to run a trial. We also have several external sources. We work with several peer groups. What are they seeing in their own facilities? What questions do they have? Do they match up? Me and Noah attending Midwest meetings or a layman conference such as this one, seeing what's new, what's going on, so we can bring back to the system. We also work with several consultants. They always have a fresh perspective and new ideas they're bringing in. Finally, just looking at peer-reviewed publications, either past or present, see what's out there and see what questions we should have. And also the constant influx of vendors with their new technologies and ingredients. So I don't think this is anything that is too new. The Idea Filter, I think this was presented at several conferences over the years. I think the only major difference would be what our categories would be. So on the next slide, I got an example, and it'll probably be easier just to show you. So I pulled our nursery idea filter for Ohio, and pretty much this is the example. The first column would be confidence in the literature. How confident is what literature has been published? Is it well run, well managed? Do we feel like we're gonna have good results? Increased profit per pig, that can be looking at average daily gain, feed efficiency, or mortality, just looking at it on a per pig basis. Complexity of the study, how hard is it to run the study? Are we having to get a lot of people on site to run, collect samples? Sorry. Might have a pause here. Gonna deduct that from my time, right? So, complexity of the study, pretty much most challenging, least challenging. Pretty much how well is it to implement it and run with it. Product study or study balance type, we always want to make sure that we're putting our nutrition and management studies to the top and putting a high priority over them versus a product. Cost of the data capture, is this a special trial where we're euthanizing pigs, collecting samples, or we have to buy a large volume of product into the mill that's just going to be used for this trial only? And finally, percentage of the herd influence. Is this a product that's going to influence the bottom 25%, or is it going to influence the whole herd? And then finally, ability to protect. This might be a little controversial, but is this something that Hords can keep internal to give us an edge, or is this something that's going to be published tomorrow? So this is kind of how the research flows in Hords. First and foremost, as I mentioned, we're gathering the research topics from our internal and external sources. We're then putting those ideas into the idea filter, and then we're using that to prioritize the list. Second thing is our research team will meet after the conclusion of each trial. We'll review the idea filter, update it as needed, and then we're going to select the topic for the next trial. The next step is once we have that idea selected, we'll design the trial, develop a protocol, and then we're going to execute. Pretty much we'll run the trial, and then once completed, we'll run the stats and also develop a report. And then this is kind of how we do our internal look. The research team is going to meet again, and we're going to review the report. We're going to decide if further research is needed. So either A, we're going to start back at the start of it, and we're going to run another side-by-side study. Or as Dr. Tokash mentioned, we'll take this out to the field and run like 20 barns on, 20 barns off to get a large replication. Or if we're really confident, we're going to implement that idea immediately. So either we'll take it back to the management teams, or if it's something dietary related, I'll just take it back and implement it. So the one thing I was asked was to do a quick example of a trial that we've done. So this would be a pellet titration we've done in the Ohio nursery. Give you guys a little feedback. We run a 1.5 pound per pig pellet budget, and then we transition them onto a very simple phase 2 mash diet. So at one of our nursery meetings, I was getting a lot of feedback saying the pigs look better once they're off the pellet and onto the simple phase 2 diet. So they were questioning me, is there any way we could decrease the budget, decrease the amount of time they're on the pellets? And for me, the phase 1 diet's the most expensive, so any reduction in use is going to correlate to increase or decrease in costs. So the objective of the trial was just to look at the effects of the pellet budget on nursery pig performance, removal rate, and mortality. So these are the materials and methods. We had 4,100 pigs on test. We're not perfect either. We had to take 2 pens off the study just because we were having some issues with feed logic in terms of feed delivery. So we had 18 or 19 reps. The pigs were fed on a feed budget basis, and give you a little bit of further illustration on what the treatments look like. You are going to see a current versus modified. They receive the same pellet budget. For time's sakes today, I'm not going to get too deep into this. If you have questions, feel free to approach me afterwards. But the synopsis of it was the current program was something that have been implemented for a while, but we were looking going to this modified. Basically, the difference was the pellets were a lot simpler and firmer in terms of diet complexity. We had a different lysine strategy and also a different zinc and copper strategy as well. I will say that so we're going to focus in on the modified treatments, basically just titrated the pellet budget from 1.5 pounds per pig all the way down to a half pound. The phase 2 diet was held consistent just because we were doing a CTC Denegard pulse, and the pigs were finished out on that final diet. So just for time's sakes, I'm not going to get too in depth. This was the phase 1 diet composition, just the current versus modified. This would be the phase 2 and 3. As I mentioned before, the phase 2 of the current was similar, only difference was the med pulse. And these were the final diets the pigs were finished out on. So I'm going to set up this slide. Along the bottom is the dietary treatments, and then along the side is our growth criteria, which in this case is average daily gain. We're kind of a bit different that we like to look at these scatter plots instead of just a simple bar graph, just from the standpoint it gives you a visual of how much variation there was in the data set and kind of gives you some hindsight of what was going on. So if we just look primarily at our pellet titration, the 1.5 down to the half pound, there was no evidence of difference that the pellet budget influenced dietary treatment. Same thing with feed efficiency, there was no difference across. So pretty much you can assume there was also no difference in average daily feed intake. So really we could go down to a half pound and not have much of effect. When we look at mortality, there was also no evidence of difference. You could say there's some numerical swings in there, but we run stats for a reason in my point of view. So when I don't see any response, I just say that's just variation in the data. One thing I should have mentioned was these pigs did have an ISD flu when they came into the nursery. So our removal rate was pretty high at the beginning, but then tapered off. But once again, even with the simple transition from a half pound to the simple phase 2 diet, there was no evidence of difference. So kind of our conclusion, there was no negative impacts of reducing the pellet budget on growth rate or mortality or removal rate. This would disagree with some past research we did with some pigs with a lighter weaning weight. We ran another study where we actually titrated the other way, went up to 2.5 pounds. So we have some data sets that are disagreeing with each other. So we put this idea back in our idea filter to run for another day and maybe just look at a wider range of pellet budgets. But just to take this presentation full circle, just to take this presentation full circle to back where we're starting, I just showed you guys a data set from our system. But before you guys take this and run with it, I think I strongly recommend that you ask yourselves these questions and see if you think you could replicate that response in your own system. With that, I'll thank you and be open to any questions.
Thanks, Dwight. Really nice job highlighting the value of commercial production research, and I like how you kind of gave some of those tidbits and real-life examples along the way, so nice job. We do, again, have time for questions, so I'll throw it out to the audience here first if we have any. Got one way in the back. While she's getting there, I like your comment about the feed bins. I'm pretty sure we have multiple feed bins that have actually never been used at our research sites, so good. I think that was a great comment and forces you to have better replication.
Nice presentation. I'm just curious about how you integrate economics within your analysis. The example that you put about reducing the budget for the pelleted feed, how much in terms of cost of the feed or cost of feeding or profit over feed will be in dollars per pig or per ton difference when you do that?
Yep, so the question was, what would be the difference in terms of dollars? So there was really no difference in growth performance. There was a small reduction. You also have to keep in mind that the feed budget was very small. So if this pellet was in that $500 to $1,000 range, if you look at it on a 1.5 pounds, it's going to be pennies per pig really in difference. So that's one reason why I didn't show it. There was no evidence of difference. Does that answer your question?
So you said like it was pennies in reduction in feed costs per pig, or but it's a pound of the difference in the pellets that you use, right? So how much in hundreds of dollars per ton in the price difference?
Yeah, so the question is like, are you looking at a per pig basis or just like a general diet cost?
For the whole nursery, for example, you spend $10,
Yep,
$12
so for the
per pig
whole-
in feed costs.
Yeah, so the whole feed cost difference would probably be about only 1 to 2 cents per pig.
I really like that chart that you made up to come up with a number for importance and how to pick the project. Is that something that evolved over time, or you came up with this? And my second question is, are there periods in time where you put more emphasis on some of these, columns, or they're always all equal and you never put more emphasis on one
So,
aspect compared to the other?
yep, so to answer your first question, we developed that chart when I first started, so about 6, 7 years ago. That was probably with a week or two of debate internally as far as what we want the columns to be, how we want to rate them. We have made some shifts over time as far as how we weight them, so that if we feel like if we're getting too far one way, as far as like if we're leaning too heavy on one way, or if we're not picking up enough difference between ideas, then we have changed it. And then, sorry, what was the second question?
Put more or less emphasis on certain columns depending on periods
Yeah.
of time or years, or?
So I think we pretty much just treat each idea individually. We really don't go year by year saying we need to look at the diet cost or anything like that. It's more or less is just we weight each idea on an individual basis and individual merit.
Mike.
Dwight, I'm curious, and what area or category are your most economically impactful research that you've done since you've been at Hord?
I would probably say average daily gain and feed efficiency. For as mortality, it takes several groups for side-by-side studies to pick up a mortality response or removal response just because of the high health in some of the sites we have. If we want to look at mortality or a removal response, we usually take it out to the field and do a barn-by-barn comparison.
Has it been more ingredient or nutrient or testing products or management things?
Yep, so I would say the biggest influence has just been nutrient loading values, just as simple as looking at your lysine curve, looking at energy levels, and then also then looking at byproducts. Had more success with that than anything else.
So how about the power analysis you guys do during your meeting before you do the research? I think you do the power analysis also, and then how many times you repeated the same testing with the different experiment? How many times you have done before?
Yep, so on the power analysis, I refer this to Noah. He's done more than I have. But far as what we do is we're pretty confident with 20 replications, just knowing the site, that we should pick up an average daily gain response. If it's really small or if we see a tendency in the stats, then that's what gives us the drive to run the study again to get more replications.
We got time for one. All right, we can squeeze 2 more in.
Thanks, Dwight, for sharing with everybody. Quick question. How do you all value nursery growth rate?
Yep, so there's several different ways you can evaluate nursery growth rate. Without trying to get too in deep in it, I'd say the best way is we look at it on a closeout basis. So we call it like income over feed cost per pig placed. So basically is just looking at the gross weight of the pen that's exit minus the entrance weight, and then we subtract out the feed cost per pen. That one will let us pick up some mortality response if there was more removals in a pen. And then also it will pick up any differences in feed usage as well. And then pretty much we just use the live weight price as well.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. My question is on the, as you know, mortality's difficult to look at. Is that something you prioritize more in your wean to finish facilities, to look at long-term effects of feeding strategies? Or just curious how you use the wean to finish research barns, to the best, to get the most value out of that research in your system, excuse me.
Yep, so the question was, how do we get the most value out of our wean to finish site? So we just started up our first study and we're looking at the life cycle of lysine, the impacts. So we're doing it from two ways. One, we'll try to focus in on the genetics just because it's easier to run a genetic trial in a wean to finish barn. So that's one of the values we're running at it. Two, we're looking at dietary or management styles that will impact the full life cycle of the pig. So like lysine would be an example. Pounds difference on a lysine strategy at the exit of nursery, does that influence the finishing weights? Another example would just be wean age, be something we could easily track in a wean to finish barn versus it's hard to track in a nursery and a finishing barn.
Perfect. Thanks. With time's sake, we're going to move on to the next one. Thanks a lot, Dwight. Let's give him another round of applause, please.